When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: Franks on Powerline. User: Mini2Z. Posted February 4th, 1996.
I wasted way too much of my life bartending down at Frank's, but I was never any good at school, and my parents didn't exactly teach me shit, so you gotta do what you gotta do to pay the bills, right? For a place down by the airport, it could have been worse anyway, but the little hole in the wall had cheap drinks and the jukebox some decent tunes when it was working, so I stuck around. The regulars were okay. Most came as much for the company as booze, but they treated me pretty respectably most of the time. It was the other randos wandering in from Powerline that I had to worry about hitting on me while drooling about how much their wife don't respect him or some other bullshit. But I hadn't made it this far in life without knowing how to shut that down quick, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Again, I needed the cash and didn't want to touch a man or take my clothes off to get it, so Frank's it was. Hell, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I'd still be there today after all these years if it weren't for the insane shit I saw out back that last night. It was late fall, cold, windy, the kind of night where the air feels sharp in your lungs. The bar was slow, just a couple of the usual suspects hanging around while I cleaned up and counted the minutes until closing. That's when he came in. Late 40s, early 50s, scruffy, already half in the bag before he even made it to the bar. He had that glazed, vacant look, the kind that always spells trouble. It's the kind that makes you wish you weren't working alone. Well, he ordered a bud and started talking. Hell, he wouldn't shut up. First, it was about his wife, how she didn't respect what he did for her family and never made his needs her priority. Same tired story I've heard 1,000 times. Men are assholes, all of them. But then he mentioned his stepson. Wiry little motherfucker went missing, he said, smirking, a spittle flying out of his trap. Best thing that ever happened to me, I tell you. Kid was a goddamn menace. Thought he was hot shit man of the house. And then he laughed, loud and ugly, like it was the funniest thing in the world. I just kept wiping down the bar, my stomach twisting. What kind of person jokes about a missing kid? The kind you don't want to waste your breath on. So I didn't say a word, just waited for him to finish his drink, get ignored by Jessie down at the end of the bar. I mean, she was a tough one, and this prick didn't know what was coming when he tried hitting on her. Eventually, though, he just dropped some cash on the table and stumbled out, and by 2, I was ready to lock up. My nerves were shot, and I figured I'd step out and have one last cigarette before I headed home to my deadbeat boyfriend. The alley behind Frank's Ain't much, just a cracked strip of pavement lined with dumpsters and, of course, the stench of stale beer. Usually it's quiet back there, a good place to clear your head after a long shift, but not that night. I heard something before I saw it. A low, wet sound like fabric tearing. No, not fabric, flesh. I froze. My brain tried to rationalize it. A raccoon? Maybe a dog or something got into the trash, but deep down, I knew better. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer, my breath hitching in my chest, and then I saw him. The asshole from the bar was sprawled on the ground, his body a ruin of torn flesh and shattered bone, his eyes empty and wide open. Blood soaked the pavement beneath him, pooling around his fat limbs in thick, dark puddles. His chest had been ripped open, ribs exposed like a twisted cage. Strips of flesh hung from his arms, swaying in the wind like ribbons. His face, God, his face was frozen in a mask of horror. Mouth slack, eyes open, like it seen something so terrible that had stolen his last breath before his body hit the ground. For a moment, I couldn't move. What the hell was going on? Then I saw him. A teenage boy, or at least something shaped like one, stood over the body. He was wiry with sharp facial features, his hoodie hanging loose on his frame, the cuffs frayed. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light, stretched too tight over his face. But his eyes, they weren't eyes at all. They were pits of black, not just dark, but endless black holes that swallowed every bit of light around them. No whites, no reflection, just emptiness. Then he turned his head and locked those eyes with me. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, and my stomach dropped. My heart was beating so hard, it felt like it might burst right out of my chest. My feet wouldn't move, couldn't move. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. And then he grinned. It was a slow, crooked grin that spread too far across his face, and it wasn't a smile meant for comfort or reassurance. And no, it was cruel and vengeful, like a predator toying with its prey, like he knew something I didn't. The grin snapped me out of it. Instinct took over. I turned and ran. Honestly, to this day, what followed is a bit of haze. I was running on pure instinct, adrenaline dictating every action. All I remember is getting back into the bar and slamming the door behind me, my hands trembling as I locked it and slid down to the floor. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my back to the door, waiting for something. Footsteps, knocking, growling, anything. But there was only silence. After God knows how long, I grabbed my keys and bolted for the parking lot, my fingers fumbling with the ignition as I shook so badly I could barely turn the key. The second the engine roared to life, I peeled out of the lot, and I have never, ever looked back. That chapter of my life was over, period. I didn't even bother letting Frank know. I just left, packed up my life, and walked away without a second thought. Fuck that place, fuck whatever I saw in that alley. For weeks, I checked the newspapers every morning, expecting to see something, anything about what happened. A murder, an animal attack, something to explain the pure violence I saw, the carnage that haunted my dreams at night. But there was nothing, not a single mention. It didn't make sense. A man had died, been ripped apart for God's sakes, and no one seemed to care. No headlines, no police report, no investigation. It was like he never existed. I told myself it was for the best. Maybe the guy was such a piece of shit that no one gave a damn about him. Not the cops, not his family, not the universe itself, but the silence ate at me. Every night, I lay awake replaying the scene in my head, those eyes, that grin, the smell of blood and stale beer, the sound of flesh tearing. And every night, it felt closer. Every creak of the house, every shadow caught in the corner of my eye made my breath hitch again. I can't shake the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. I've even started keeping my blinds closed during the day, stopped going out at night. My boyfriend insists it's just paranoia, a trauma response, but deep down, I know better. That shit I saw was not normal shit. I never should have gone out back that night, never should have looked around the corner. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed.
Subject, the rope. User, not a D8. Posted, January 13th, 1998.
Of all the things that could have haunted me about finding my best friend hanging dead in his living room, I didn't expect it to be the rope itself. When I walked into Damien's house because he wasn't answering the front door, the first thing I took in after jolting at the figure swinging behind his battered sofa was the tongue lolling grotesquely out of its mouth. If any part of what I saw that day was going to follow me into my dreams and beyond, I would have assumed it would be that. In those initial few seconds, I thought it was some kind of elaborate prank he'd set up. It would have been at the far end of fucked up jokes he'd played on our friend group, but still not entirely out of the realm of possibility. Damien was the best and worst kind of friend. He could tell when you were upset and knew exactly how to jar you out of whatever negative thought loop you happened to find yourself in. Conversely, if he was in one of his moods, which could come on like summer storms according to some internal logic he never shared, he might pick and jab at your insecurities until you went home with tears in your eyes. He was unpredictable, exciting, and frustrating in equal measure. Like a roller coaster, Damien's friendship could exhaust you and thrill you at the same time. We knew he had demons because we all do. You don't get to be as funny as we are without them. It's just that we always thought he had them under control. Then, one winter afternoon, I had to cut him down from the rafters while a 911 operator talked me through the steps of CPR. It was too late by far, but I did what I was told all the same. Touching my lips to his felt so strange. We'd always been close, but never like that, and even though he was cold, I felt a surge of awkwardness as I tried to breathe the life back into him. It wasn't until after paramedics took over that I noticed the taste of cherry Coke on my lips. It was his favorite, and he must have had one last drink before he did what he did. I had my first nightmare about Damien's suicide after the funeral. In it, I was trying to get into his house because on the other side of the door, He was screaming my name. There were crashing sounds, running footsteps, and a high-pitched whine I couldn't place. When I could finally open the door, it was just in time to see the thick, corded rope winding its way up his leg like a cobra, coiling around his torso until it reached his throat. Once there, it tightened and tightened, lengthening his neck until it was 2 and 3 times its normal length. Damien's eyes bulged, his fingernails clawing frantically at the rough fibers digging into his skin, compressing his windpipe and herniating the discs in his spine. My friend looked at me accusingly before the pressure popped his eyeballs, sending a sour, gelatinous spray out towards me, some of it landing in my open mouth. I woke up vomiting. More dreams followed in the ensuing weeks, each of them a different version of the rope coming to find me. It would drag itself along the ground, the dry rasp it made sounding uncannily like my name. Closer and closer it wriggled, an undulating sine wave promising me the same oblivion that had claimed Damien. It told me lies, that he had been satisfied at the end, content in the choice he'd made. I couldn't believe it, wouldn't believe it. We had all shared our experiences with depression. It was one of the things that had bound us together, and the one thing we'd agreed upon was that suicide was a loser's way out. Whatever Damien was, he was no loser. There's no way in hell he would have been satisfied with taking his own life if he was in his right mind. That's how I knew the rope was lying, so it could have me too. Now that lies have failed to work, the rope has become more aggressive, intruding into the fringes of the waking world. Monday morning, I willed myself out from a dream of choking to see something slithering quickly away into the dark corners of my room. Tuesday, alone on the subway, my ears pricked at the unmistakable dry riss of hemp strands scraping along the vinyl floor behind me. I spun, but not fast enough. Wherever the rope had been, it was gone. Even now, as I write this, I can all but feel its rough kiss around my ankles, nuzzling me like a beloved pet. It wants me to believe that it means me no harm, that it only wants to comfort me as it did Damien, to squeeze away my fears about the world, to quiet the storm in my mind by depriving it of oxygen, to bring me peace. I know the rope lies, and yet, in the ersatz moonlight of my computer screen, the world without my friend seems so cold and lonely. Did he feel like this at the end? Is that how the snake charmed him into compliance? If I listen closely, I can almost hear Damien's voice. Is he whispering encouragement or a warning about the strange compression of my ribcage? His distant cries mingle with the rope's counter-argument, a comforting whir of fabric rubbing against itself like a lullaby, singing me to a sleep I crave.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.